Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back to the channel. I'm your host Paul, and earlier you saw Max on the gun. So we're talking LPVOs again. This time we're circling back to a familiar name, primary arms. If y'all remember, we recently looked at the primary arms 1A SLX within their budget optics line. We found it really strong and really solid performer. Well, this time primary arms was gracious enough to send us one of their top of line scopes, their PLX, P for platinum. The obvious question is, how much of a difference is this versus their budget line? And secondly, and more importantly, how does this compare to other scopes in its range, especially since it's the platinum line now? Well, we're gonna find out because we're gonna look at it right now, so let's go. Profile mounting. All right, fellas, first things first, let's look at this thing in profile. Well, straight out of the box, my first impressions are the fit and finish on the scope is excellent, from the knurling on the knobs to the feel of the zoom lever and just to the actual rigidness of the scope body. This thing is a beast. Now, this does mean that this is actually one of the biggest scopes we've had on the channel as far as lengthwise. It's about 1 inch longer than most scopes. But unlike those other scopes, this is a 34mm tube, so just keep that in mind when you're mounting the scope. That means that the walls are much more rigid. You've got beefier construction. You've got more room inside the scope for things like bigger glass and potentially more light gathering ability. But notice the front still has a 24mm objective end. So that means that you still have the exit pupil restriction that we talked about in the user guide. So all of that comes with some cost, and the cost is added weight. I think this is actually the heaviest scope we've had on this channel. Even when you consider the original Vortex Gen 2 1:6, which came in at 25.2, this is almost 2 ounces heavier at 26.9, so it's a beast. And that's not even including the mount. Speaking of mounts, as we discussed earlier, you will need a 34mm mount for this. And because of this scope's weight, it's really tempting to go with something like ultralight, like the AR Precision 34mm mount. It's only 4 ounces or so, and that's a really good option. However, I do want to note that because of the amount of weight that this scope puts on top of the rings, it does add some stress on those rings. So I generally tend to lean more towards, I need a scope mount with heavier rings. And for that reason, that's the reason why you see us running the Warren 34mm in this video. The QD lever is really excellent, and they skeletonized the mount as much as possible to shave as much weight as you can off the mount. So we really dig them. If you're interested in either, we'll put them in the description below. So now that you have it mounted, you're almost adding 2 pounds onto the top of the gun. Anytime you do that, you kind of have to rethink the purpose of the optic. And I think about this scope is more at home, sitting in a tree stand, benching out or proned out at your favorite long range and plinking steel at that distance, versus, hey, I need to quickly deploy this carbine out of my patrol cruiser, or I'm running around on my favorite 3-gun stage. So if you think your intended purpose is the former rather than the latter, then I think this scope still has a lot to offer. So we'll talk about that more in the continuing sections next. Controls. So first up, let's look at the exposed turrets. Now, usually I prefer covered turrets, but I think Primary Arms has a good design with their locked turret, so meaning that you can't turn them while the turret is pushed down. To actually turn them, you gotta pull up to unlock it and make your turn and push down when you're ready. So once unlocked, the turrets actually feel really good. They feel great when you're actually turning them. Very high quality, very clicky, so to acknowledge your feedback. They're 1/10 mil, so 0.1 mil between each click. So just doing the math, that's about 0.36 inches at 100 yards. So after you zero, as we mentioned in the user guide, remember to reset your zero index mark, and you do that on the primary arms by unscrewing the Torx at the top, pulling up, re-indexing the zero mark, and pushing it back down to screw down the Torx screw. And the last note about the turret is this is one of those scopes where the turrets are measured in mils, but the BDC/reticle is measured in MOA. Generally you want them matching. So my advice is if you're gonna use a scope, just think of using the turrets only for zeroing and using the reticle for your long range shooting and holdovers, because they don't match. And if you try to trying to match them, you're going to get the math mixed up in your head. On the rear, you'll find a standard diopter and the zoom lever. And one note about the zoom lever, we are using the MK machining polymer throw lever here, so it's cheap, but it works great for one-handed operation. However, the one note is the primary arm's internal zoom lever turns so smooth, you may not need an external throw lever for this. Lastly, on the left side, you'll find the brightness control, which spins between its 11 levels. It's got 9 daytime and 2 night vision levels. And there is an off position in between, which is great. Now, as far as feel, they do turn relatively easy, but it's at the right amount of friction to where once you set it, it's not gonna move easily if you put it in a bag or something or bump it against something. So it's definitely set it and forget it. You know, one last note about the brightness control is I like how there's knurling and it's actually stepped down from the actual brightness control itself. So if you have to change the battery cap, you can do this without turning the brightness control itself. I can't tell you how many times I've done that on other scopes, so thanks for paying attention to the little details, primary arms. It's especially noted. Glass and reticle. So when it comes to glass quality, you can really tell the difference between this and the Chinese glass on the SLX. So this Japanese glass, when you're looking through it, it has excellent color, contrast, no chromatic aberration of any kind. It really is glass that's really close to the Vortex razor line. But at 1X, you're gonna notice a small band of fisheye. You start pushing towards the edge of the glass, even though the center is extremely clear because that's where the target is. So that's where you're gonna be looking most of the time. So you're probably not gonna notice that much. So the field of view that you're getting at 1X is about 106 feet. So it's really close to the Nightforce NX8 we looked at in the 2019 video, which I'll link to if you haven't seen it. So you'll see a little bit of the scope body. It's not that big of a deal, although it won't shoot as flat as something like the Vortex Razor, but still really nice to shoot at 1X since the glass is really, really clear. So once you power on the reticle, how does it look at maximum brightness under daytime conditions? Well, it looks really similar to the primary arm's SLX in that it's just bright enough for daytime conditions. The reticle will turn red so you can see it, but it's more noticeable against like a white or bright type of target. But if you point into something like a mixed type lighting, a brown target or so, it's gonna be a little bit harder to see. So the reticle size at 1X is 65 MOA, so it's really close to what the EOTech reticle is. So it's pretty large, and that does help a little bit with the visibility since it's not the brightest reticle. Just a reminder that since this is a first focal plane reticle, you really have to make the reticle really, really bright since it gets so small. But a long range is really where this reticle shines. On the left and right of the reticle, you have the ranging ladders. So if you put a man-sized target at the top of its head on one of those numbers, then you'll have its range. And if that's not enough ranging for you, just like the ACOG, they also have shoulder width ranging on the BDC ladder itself, out to 800 yards. In our experience, those turned out to be really accurate. Now on the BDC ladder, you'll have your 5 and 10 mile an hour wind holds, and you also have those 2 big dots at the top on the left and right for your moving target. So you got plenty of holds. Speaking of holds, on the BDC itself, the manual explains in really excellent detail how the BDC works and is calibrated to certain ammo. But as you know from watching the user guide, you really should chrono your ammo, get your ballistic data, and plug it into Strelic. Now, one note is Strelic Pro, you need the Strelic Pro version in order to get this ACSS M2 reticle, as the Raptor reticle is not in the basic version. Now, after we plugged in our ammo, we zeroed our gun for 100 yards. We found the holes coming out of Strelic were dead on.
200, 300, hit, 375, hit, 475, hit.
And as a reminder, since this is a first focal plane scope, let's say we zero at 8, does that mean our BDC is accurate at 6X?
Hit. 375. Hit.
Yes. You know, last thought about reticles, if Hollow center are the guys that pack a lot of functionality into their red dots. I think primary arms are the guys that pack a lot of functionality into the reticles. I mean, other companies add components of it, like for example, the Vortex 1 to 10 has a ranging reticle, but I think in my opinion, nobody puts together long and short range functionality into the reticles quite like primary arms does. All right, fellas, so what's the conclusion? What's the final verdict on this primary arms LPVO? Well, if you go back to what I mentioned about weight, I could say factoring in all its great features and its almost flawless execution of certain elements, I think it still falls into that category of a DMR type rifle, something that's at home on an 18, 20-inch AR barrel that spends most of its time prone out or bench shooting. For sure, it has the field of view and good enough illumination for CQB type shooting, so it can definitely do that, but I don't think it's its primary focus. And so if you're looking for this type of scope in its price range, I think it's one of the best scopes available, and that's the final verdict. Hope it was helpful, and as always, if you're interested in any of the equipment that you see in this video, I'll list them in the description. And if you found this video useful, please like, share, and subscribe so this small channel can keep growing. So thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time.